Well, hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Happy Wednesday from the US and
Happy Thursday from Oz, the land of
hello,
Oz.
hello. Hello, hello. All
Well,
right.
well, hello, everybody. I am Leanne, and welcome to episode 15.
And I am Jason, and let's talk.
Let's talk. This is a space where no topic is off limits. We're going to be discussing things from well-being to resilience, money, relationships, mindset, and so much more. And as you know, we'll double click on the neuroscience and the emotional intelligence because that's really our sweet spot.
Absolutely. And here at Let's Talk, we always bring different perspectives, real stories, and those honest conversations. Because the things we don't talk about that often are really the things that matter most to us and need to be in conversation.
Yeah, need, I love that. So, our goal here is simple to spark new ideas, to shift mindsets, and give you practical tools that you can use in your life and in your leadership.
Yeah. So whether you're tuning in for some inspiration, some growth, or just a fresh perspective, let's talk.
Let's talk. Love it. So today, this episode is really called the EQ advantage and emotional intelligence as the ultimate performance advantage is really key for us to look at, whether it's at work or in our actual everyday lives, because emotional mastery is a, a necessity. It's not a soft skill, it's a performance skill. It's actually what gives you the edge.
Exactly. In that, that little extra strategy that we all need, right? So often the differences between people who cope and those who thrive um, is really where that difference lies, right? So today we'll unpack the emotional intelligence and what it really is, why it matters so much to really use in our daily lives, right? And how it gives us that advantage in difficult situations, in difficult conversations, whether those are at work or in your personal life, or a combination of both.
So EQ gets talked about a lot, but it's often misunderstood because emotional intelligence isn't about being nice or calm all the time, because that's just not realistic. It's also not about suppressing our emotions. It's what it is actually clarity, right? It's the matter of being able to choose our responses. So EQ is not emotional suppression, like pushing emotions down actually heightens emotions. And not
Mhm.
only does it heighten our emotions, it heightens the emotions of everyone around us. So all of our blood pressure goes up. If somebody's suppressing, everybody feels it. They can, like our spidery senses, can pick it up. And yet, that's what we're kind of taught to do. Again, it's not this kind of toxic positivity either. It's not, happy, happy, joy, joy all the time. It's about being real and using our emotions to our advantage. So getting the signals and actually choosing our responses based on what outcome do I actually want rather than just reacting and having regret later, which I think we've all had episodes of that. I know I certainly have. And EQ is not about avoiding conflict. It's about actually being courageous and having the conversations that need to be had, but having them in a way that lands well for both the speaker and the receiver. Often when we have to have these tough conversations, it creates a threat state in both parties, not just the
Mhm.
one who might be receiving the feedback, but also the one in giving the conversation, because we don't know where it's going to land. We don't know how it's going to be received. We don't know what is going to happen. So both people can get into a bit of a threat state. So emotional intelligence is actually being able to navigate all of that mess so we can show up effectively and have the people around us also show up effectively.
Yeah, Leanne, when you were talking about that emotional suppression, what immediately came up for me, kind of in that double click, is when you suppress, anxiety goes up. Self anxiety as well as the anxiety in the room or whoever you're with. So,
Absolutely.
so it's that using your emotional intelligence to not avoid the emotions that you're feeling, but like, how you're managing them in the moment and how you're stewarding yourself forward in a positive way. So emotion intelligence really is about the ability to recognize your emotions, right? Understand, what are they telling you? Like, what are they telling you in the moment, or what are they telling you in the big picture? And then choosing how you respond. So it's that awareness, right? Where it's like, not like, okay, Mr. Miss Positivity all the time, or suppressing the emotions, but it's like recognizing the emotions in the moment or the bigger picture. What are they telling you? And then taking that step back to say, okay, I have a responsibility and I have a choice how I'm going to respond here, rather than reacting. So really, at the end of the day, it's really about choice. And choice is everything when pressure is high, because a lot of times you need to make those decisions in the split moment. So when you have that extra awareness to be able to take that quick step back in the moment to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to choose to respond this way versus this way. That's when you really feel that EQ advantage.
Absolutely. And the ability to be able to step back, to create that space, to pause, um, is the super skill, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not always easy. It's simple, but not easy. Like, let's just speak truthfully about that. So I'd love to share today. We're going to kind of dive into a neuroscience model, but it's really an EQ model by a group called 6 Seconds. So we're going to have a look at that today and actually teach you or have a conversation about the 8 competencies that we can learn, we can build muscle in, that is emotional intelligence. So that's kind of where we're heading, because neuroscience says that emotions are data. It is information, as Jason said. It's telling us something that's important. It's information telling us what to look out for, what we need to manage. It might be, our way forward is blocked and we've hit a wall and we need to navigate that. There could be that there's something really important to us, or it could also be sadness because of loss, right? So emotions are telling us things all the time. And we want to kind of be able to tune in and listen to, what exactly am I being told here? Why am I feeling the feels? Because the feels are going to come in, but the why am I feeling them? What information is it trying to tell me? Gives us our ability to be able to pause and respond rather than react. And as I keep saying, emotions are signals, it's data. It's data from your nervous system. They influence our attention, like what we actually pay attention to, but also how much we can focus our attention at any particular time. It impacts our memory because we memorize things generally with high emotion attached to it. So we don't remember all the little things that just kind of go along nicely. It's usually the things that we store in our memory are the things that were either really traumatizing or alternatively really joyful. Like, we all know where we were on set days like September 11th, but on the 10th and 8th, no idea what I was doing because high emotion was attached to that day. So if we think about it from that perspective, we can use emotions to help us memorize things. Um, and we also know that people will remember more if emotion is highly attached. It impacts our decision making. So if we're not regulating ourselves very well, our decision making is going to be impacted. We will be we'll err on the side of caution more often than not. We won't take the necessary risks that might be required in order to have the better outcomes. So our decision making, we end up kind of twisting in the wind, right? And not able to make decisions. It can kind of really impact our ability to decide and also the decisions we're making. Obviously, if we can't regulate ourselves, our relationships are going to suffer, because what tends to happen for most people is they might suppress all day at work and then go home and take it out on their family or their pets or their children, or somebody who did something minute wrong on the way home, and then the volcano erupts, right? And this poor person pops all that frustration that you've been bottling down all day. So relationships can get impacted as well. Behavior is impacted because we often don't behave the way we would like to if we're emotionally charged. Um, we have all of these grand ideas about who we are and how we want to show up in the world. And then our button gets pushed and that goes out the window and somebody else takes over our body or something else takes over our body. So our behavior is impacted. So all of these things really, as stewards, as leaders of our work, our families, our community, I'm leading ourselves. We need to make sure that we're aware that if our emotions are kicking in, these things are going to be impacted, and I might need to regulate before I try and make a decision, before I take it out on my family, before my behavior has me acting like a pork chop, and all of those other things.
Yeah. And so, folks, really, when it comes down to it, right, when emotions are ignored, your actual performance drops, whether that's performance at work or, at home, or just, in that merged life that we all live in now with, because we're so connected with technology. So when emotions are unacknowledged, they don't disappear, they actually leak, right? And what does that mean, right? So when you're suppressing those emotions or not acknowledging them, or a combination of both, passive aggressiveness can come out. Instead of being direct with people, you just you know want to operate in this other sphere and be passive aggressive, and not whether that's with colleagues or peers or your partner or family, however your life is made up, passive aggressiveness can show up if it's not, if those emotions are not acknowledged correctly and taken care of, right, and nurtured. You can also experience burnout. Um, and when you have burnout, you usually don't sleep well, you usually don't eat well, you don't communicate well, you don't exercise, etc. So a lot of the areas of well-being that we talked about in series one, when you're burnout, you just don't pay attention to them. And a lot of that is because you're not acknowledging the why. And the why usually is unacknowledged, suppressed emotions. Also, like Leeanne was talking about a little earlier, poor decisions, right? Decision making can be poor because you're not bringing in your awareness, you're not bringing in that emotional intelligence, right? So, and poor decisions can also be married with burnout too, right? And passive aggressiveness. Also, it can be so much easier to be in conflict with others because there might be, one small little thing, because you're not listening to understand to someone, but you're listening to react. And that can cause, that's one sphere of how conflict can be caused, because you're not fully aware, you're not using your EQ, etc. And whether that's in your professional life, personal life, or a lot of times, both of those are married together, like I said a little bit ago, because of just being so attached to technology. And there's some good things with that, but then there's also some things that we need to pay attention to too, right? And then just being disengaged. And disengagement, can also be, I've personally seen it When emotions are not acknowledged, sometimes people fall into depression, right? And sometimes it could be situational depression, sometimes it can merge into major depression, depends on what emotions you're actually not acknowledging and getting out there and dealing with and having to deal with some of the trauma that goes with some of those. So disengagement doesn't necessarily mean that you're depressed, but that is one symptom that can be associated with disengagement. So with those examples, high performers aren't less emotional, they're actually more emotionally skilled, right? And usually they're more emotionally skilled because they have that self-awareness piece they can tap into. And it takes practice. It's not something that just happens overnight, right? It's a muscle that um, you got to condition, you got to work it, right? So, and sometimes it's easy to be like, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to actually deal with that today, just like going to the gym, right? So this section, I just want to leave you with that. Again, high performers aren't less emotional, they're just more skilled within their emotions and how they deal with them and how they choose to react.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Jason, just as you're saying that, there was a time where big organizations, there's a study that's been done, and I can't remember who the study was by, but I'll try and find it for our conversation next time. But they found that organizations that employed people based on their skill set only were later fired because they didn't have the EQ and the emotional intelligence skills to work with their teams and the rest of it. So you're absolutely right in saying that, high performers are skilled at emotional intelligence because it's that builds connection with people. If you're passive aggressive, if you're disinterested, if you're doing all of those things, it's going to create conflict with people around you, or people just aren't going to enjoy working with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be your loved ones as well. It's like, oh, like like we've all got somebody who we love, but we kind of cringe because they're always drama or reactive or highly emotive or constantly negative, or there's always conflict involved, right? So we don't want to be that person at
Yeah.
the end of the day. We want to be the person that can kind of hold the container and process our own stuff, but also hold the container and help others process their stuff. And that's what true leadership really is. It's about allowing others to and giving them, imparting the skill set onto them. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the core models, as I mentioned earlier, that we love to use is from 6 Seconds, which is a global emotional intelligence network. They're a non-for-profit, and their goal is to have 1 billion people using EQ well, right, around the globe. And we will post their website into the thing later because there's so many free resources there that you can utilize. Plus, they've got all sorts of little courses and stuff that you can use. So we will post that because if you've got an interest in emotional intelligence, they've got some really good models and really good bits that you can download or watch or just start thinking about differently. Because it breaks emotional intelligence down into 8 key competencies. And these competencies are learnable, they're scalable, they're measurable. So it's not that you either have EQ or you don't. It's that I can actually start focusing on some of these competencies and build some muscle in that because it is muscle and it is repetition, and we've got to practice these. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily come naturally all the time. And some of them you might be more skilled at, it's more natural than others. Some of them you might overdo. So, too much or too little of any of these competencies can actually work against you. And I'll go through as we go through, we'll speak to some of that as well. So,
Yeah, Leanne, can I just put in one little thing?
please.
Um, just an analogy that I actually learned from a friend of mine who is a strengths-based coach. And I've attended a couple of his workshops, and he talks about like your strengths with the Clifton Strengths Finder, for example, like you can overdo your strengths and you can underdo your strengths. So he was like, think of it like a dimmer switch.
Mm.
Like, when do you need to move the dial up a little bit to make your um uh uh strength I have to think of what the word was. The strength, like shine a little bit brighter. And when do you need to dim it down? So I think that's kind of a great, just easy, rememberable analogy for folks to kind of take away as they learn about what we're about to teach them.
Yeah. I really like that because I'm quite visual. So I can visualize the light going up, higher or lower as I'm turning the switch, right? Um, and I often say turn the dial, don't I? Actually, it's
Yes,
part of
you
my,
do.
we've got to turn down the dial on the lights. So I love that. That just works really well for me. So this model breaks these 8 competencies into 3 categories. We'll call it. Know yourself is the first category. Choose yourself, so the choices that you make, and the last one is give yourself, right? So, and each category has got a couple of these competencies inside it. So the first one that I'll talk about is know yourself. And that's really about self-awareness. It's about being able to look at who you are, how you respond, what pushes your buttons, and a whole range of things. The 2 competencies that are under this particular category is emotional literacy and pattern recognition, recognizing patterns. Now, patterns happen all the time. We know and we see it very clearly in other people. If X happens, they're going to react like this. But sometimes we're not so aware of our own pattern recognition. And patterns are useful. If we can see what the patterns are, we can modify things. So we can either modify the behavior, we can modify the situation, we can modify some of the outcomes because now we're aware of the patterns that occur. And emotional literacy is the ability to be able to articulate what it is that I'm actually feeling, not just happy, sad, mad, glad, bad, like, and fine, which is, the 5 or 6 words that most people use. There's a plethora of words that can talk about what it is that's coming up for us. So we want to make sure that we're recognizing emotions and articulating them. Like I'm feeling despondent, or I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling rage right now. Like there's a difference to all of the emotions. So I'd highly recommend getting like an emotion wheel or having a look at Brene Brown's book on emotional emotions, Atlas of the Heart, that one's called. So there's all sorts of stuff. Search for it, but start broadening your emotional vocabulary because when you name it correctly, you tame the emotion. Like it actually feels seen and heard, and it no longer has to scream at you, right? Because that's generally what happens. The more we suppress, the more it's kind of screaming at us, going like, warning, warning. But if we can see it, notice it, articulate what it is, we're turning down that dimmer switch, right? On the lights. Like we're actually just kind of turning it down a little bit. And that pattern recognition, if you can understand, oh, I know that when I go into this situation, this is how I generally react or respond. Or when I speak to that particular person, it always kind of riles me up. If we can notice that, we can then kind of put some pre-thinking or strategies in. We can change the way we think, we can change the way we feel, or we can change the way we act. They're the 3 key things: think, feel, act, TFA. So I think it's really important to recognize the emotion, noticing them and naming them accurately, understanding your own triggers, right? And pattern recognition for others as well. But more, this is really an inside job. This is about us managing us. So noticing our own patterns because you can't manage what you can't name, right? You can't. So if we're not aware, we're not going to be able to navigate that space very well. Awareness comes before change comes. So you have to be self-aware before you can change anything. And sometimes the awareness comes because other people tell us stuff that we don't like to hear. And sometimes it's us noticing, hey, I didn't like the way I reacted. What can I do differently here? So that's kind of the know yourself, emotional literacy and recognize patterns, two really important competencies. Jason, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered, the know yourself really well, Leanne. And I guess, I would just validate that you can't tame an emotion, you can't get it, in the ring, to start, working with it until you name it. Um, and I think that's a simple tool that I think is easily rememberable for folks to be like, okay, yep, okay, I'm having an emotion here. What is it? As you said, broaden your emotional vocabulary. And sometimes it is scary, to be like, shit, like I have to like really name what I'm feeling right now. But in order to manage it, that regulation part, like you got to put a name to it first. So I just wanted to validate that that is a helpful and useful skill for folks, even if you're just kind of starting out in this area of emotion intelligence, increasing it for your own self. How can I make it as an additive into my life, right?
And actually, Jason, just as you were saying that, the other thing that I wanted to say up front, but I'll say it now, is that there's no emotions that are good or bad. We often like the happy, happy, joy, joy emotions, and the other ones we kind of go, oh, they're bad. To be angry, we're not allowed to be angry, or whatever the case may be. But actually, that's not true. There's no good or bad in emotions. Some of our reactions may not necessarily be ideal, but but the emotions themselves are information. And if we can stop, um, glorifying some and punishing others, we're going to have a much better way of navigating the terrain with them. So I just wanted to say that as well.
Yeah. So the second area that Leanne mentioned is choose yourself. And within this arena, there are four competencies. And the four competencies are applying consequential thinking. Say that 10 times.
So
And what does that mean, right? Navigating your emotions, your internal intrinsic motivation, and lastly, optimism. So you can kind of think of these four competencies as where immense responsibility comes in, right? And a lot of emotional self-management, right? And how those two, you know, um, work in synergy with each other too. And sometimes they may be at odds with one another too, right? And that's where that extra level of awareness comes in to be like, you know, okay, responsibility and emotional self-management, like how can we make a negotiation here that's going to satisfy both, right? So, and 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 these competencies, you know, are competencies that I just want to reiterate that they're competencies not just in your professional life, they're competencies for your entire life, professional, personal, how they're married together, the good, the bad, the ugly, all that. So I just wanted to reiterate because sometimes people think models and they think, oh, work, professional, but they're actually very useful for the totality of one's life.
yeah, because
So
who you are shows up everywhere.
yeah.
Right? You can't go anywhere without you. So,
Hmm.
this again, I keep saying it's an inside job. Like this is so we can be the best version of us
Yeah.
wherever we are. Um,
Yeah.
so I love that. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah. And that reminds me of, like back a number of years ago, not so many years ago, but a number of years ago when it was like, leave your personal life at home, when you go into work, leave those emotions at home, leave the trauma or whatever. And it's just like, I think psychologically that was not a really good psychologically safe space that leadership and organizations were actually setting. So it's interesting how that has changed. But now in present day we have many different things that we are dealing with on the table, but I'll leave that there. So in this area of these 4 competencies, some helpful tips and like what's included here, right? So pausing before you react. So, you've heard Leanne and I, and probably even maybe a couple of our guest experts in our last series, talk about listening to understand and not listening to react. So there is a whole bunch of responsibility and emotional self-management just in that small statement of, pause, listen to what the other person or the other entity or group is trying to say before you're, right as they finish their sentence. Because when you do that, you're not listening to what the other party is actually saying. You're listening to put your idea or your opinion on the table. And so that pausing, that taking a step back, that self-awareness will help immensely in this area. Regulating emotions, right? So that pausing can help you regulate in the moment. Because, sometimes it's something super passionate that you want to get out there, right? Because you're just so super excited about it. And you're just like, whoever's talking to shut up. Like, I just want to get my idea on the table. And so it's not a bad thing, but it's like, you need to, in those moments, like regulate the excitement, just pause it, put it over here for just a moment, because it will get there. And it'll probably get there in a much better way and a much more collaborative way, etc., if you use that skill of regulating your emotions. And a lot of that comes through pausing and self-awareness and taking a step back. Also, aligning your behavior with your values. And that could probably be a whole episode on its own, but people really need to get super, super clear, crystal clear on their values. And I do a lot of values work with my coaching clients as one of the first things, because if you're not in alignment with your values or even know what your values are, professional and personal, and a lot of times those are married together too, your behavior is going to be all over the place. You're not going to have a clear lens to look through, or one of those things is like everything, like every decision that you need to make, you can run through your values. And if it's not in alignment, then it's probably not a good thing for you to be doing or be leading or whatever. So know your values, and you're going to be able to better align your behavior and your reactions and your self-management responsibility, etc., once you have those in alignment. And also choosing intentional responses. Like, think about your response before you just put it out there. Think about the impact. It's just not your ego that you're trying to please, especially when you're a leader, right? And and whether that's being a leader at home too, right? Because if your responses are always just reactionary and putting people on edge and increase the anxiety, you're not really operating that good space of emotional intelligence. So choose your responses intentionally and think about the impact to others and to also yourself too, right? You got to look at your own self too, is how is this response going to affect me in the moment and for the long term? So This is the difference between having emotions and being driven by them. So I'll say that again, and then I'll hand it over to Leeanne. The difference between having emotions and being driven by them.
Yeah, because we all are emotional beings, right? So we have emotions. And unfortunately, sometimes we allow them to take over. And that's never going to be a good outcome for anyone, really.
No.
And I just wanted to go back and double click on some of these competencies because it's some of these ones that I said overuse is not good. So applying consequential thinking, the ability to be able to look at the pros and the cons, not just the cons. Like often we look at the potential risks and trying to mitigate them, but there's also the pros. There's also good stuff. So applying consequential thinking allows you to weigh things well. Now, if this particular competency is too high, we can get into analysis paralysis.
Yes.
Because we'll overthink everything, right? So we then need to build the muscle of optimism because even though we might overthink, if we're optimistic, then it's like, okay, well, even if it doesn't work, we'll be able to work our way through it. So, you know, some of these things have to work together well in order to have us show up as really effective leaders. And this optimism piece, I love it. Like I'm a huge optimist, always have been, always will be. But what I learned went through emotional intelligence was if you're very, very optimistic, you can appear unempathetic. Because if somebody's going through a hard time, you're instantly, your brain's like, okay, well, we could do this or this or this, or you'll be right, or at least, things are going well in this area of your life. Like we kind of, rather than sit in the yuck with somebody, like we're trying to shift their state almost, look at the silver lining. And we can't silver lining everything. Some things are just shit. And we need to be able to sit with somebody and go, you know what? That sucks. And that's okay. So too much optimism can have us looking like or appearing unempathetic. And I know I feel deeply for people, but the way I was responding wasn't demonstrating that. So these days I'm able to just sit with somebody in their mess, in their emotion, in whatever, and just go far out. Thank you for sharing that with me. I can't imagine how that feels. And sitting in the yuck, in the discomfort with somebody, like we don't have to fix them. We don't have to change it. We don't have to shape shift. We don't have to silver lining everything. Sometimes just the acknowledgement of, oh my goodness, that's awful, is enough for somebody to start regulating themselves. And for ourselves, if we're whatever we focus on grows. So I'm really of the mind that if we can be more optimistic, if we can actually look for the silver lining a lot of the time for ourselves, our life appears better. It flows easier. There's more goodness around. I remember years ago, I had a boyfriend and he used to say to me, you're always, looking at the right things and blah, 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 and it was so funny because he was a truly pessimistic kind of everything was bad. There was always stuff to look out for, to navigate, whereas I always saw the good in things. And it was interesting because I lost my wallet in the shopping center as I was buying groceries. And this person literally chased me through the store until they found me to give it back to me. The very next day, my now ex boyfriend lost his wallet and it was gone for life. And I'm just like, see, that's the difference. Because I do good and because I feel good and because I would do that for somebody else, then that's what comes back to me. So we have these choices about how we show up in the world. We can look for the grenade that's coming, or we can look at the sun that's shining. The choice is ours. And I know for me, I'd rather focus on the nicer stuff. I know that that other stuff is there, but if I focus on that, that's going to affect my state. And then that affects those around me. So I'm very conscious about that. So I'm not saying don't be optimistic, and I'm not saying be fully optimistic that it's toxic almost, but find your balance in that. Use consequential thinking. Don't make rash decisions and then have decision regret later. Like actually weigh the pros and cons. Look at the complete picture. That intrinsic motivation, be motivated from the inside out, not always chasing the carrot. Like find something, your values and your purpose that pull you forward. And we'll talk about purpose in the next part. This is all about our choice, choosing ourselves. So I just wanted to kind of double click on those things because I think it's really important to see how the seesaw affects with some of these emotions.
Absolutely. And it made me think when you were talking about optimism, Leanne, you know, and then, on the other side of the teeter-totter, right? The pessimistic. Like also through that lens, like you can't live in that pessimistic sphere all the time, right?
Oh, some do.
And some do, absolutely, some do, yes. So I think it's that also finding that nice ebb and flow of when like, okay, you know what, like I just need to be pessimistic right now, like for A, B, and C, you know and having that person that will listen and be like, yeah. But it's that staying in the yuck all the time, and that pity party for me can also get because what made me think about it is when you said, sometimes when people are so optimistic all the time, they can appear unempathetic. Also, I believe the same on this side of the teeter-totter, that you can appear unempathetic because you want it to be all about you,
Yeah.
and what you're going through, and your et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, it's hard.
Good point.
It's hard.
It's very self focused and self oriented, isn't it? Very
Yeah.
much so.
Yeah. And so and yeah, it's hard work, whatever end that you naturally navigate to, it's hard to come into the middle sometimes. But I think you're a much better person from a growth perspective, and have so much more of a capacity to empathize.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about the optimism, I was like, oh my gosh, like, because I thought of a couple people that I know who just over here all the time, and it's just like, oh my god, like I just sometimes just don't like to be around them.
Yeah.
Because it's like you just drain so much energy.
Yeah.
And then sometimes over here the energy's too much too, for some people. Especially for introverts, for sure.
Yeah.
So anyways, I just wanted to put in those couple things as kind of an analogy on the other side of the
Yeah,
teeter-totter.
I think that's a really relevant point. We don't want to be at the extremes of any of these competencies. It's a spectrum or it's a continuum. I think my hand just raised by itself. It's a spectrum and a continuum, but we want to be able to kind of navigate through it as needed.
Yeah.
But I know for me, I'd much rather be optimistic than pessimistic. It just feels better in my body when I can see
absolutely.
joy as opposed to the horrors, right? And there's
Yeah.
horrors all the time. So
Yeah.
thank you
Absolutely.
for putting that in, Jason.
Yes, but I
Now,
agree with you and align with you. I'd rather be more so on this side than on this side, because it's just better for me all around.
it's better
Yeah.
for our health, actually. It's better for our nervous system. It's better for our mental state. So many studies have been done on the effects of stress, and stress generally comes from looking at things with doom and gloom, as opposed to with that optimistic view that I'll always find a way, we'll get out of it, it's all good, right? Like it has a different effect on our physical body and our
Yeah.
emotional psyche. So it's interesting. And then the last part, the third part of the sphere of the 6 seconds model is this idea of give yourself. And the competencies in here are empathy and pursue noble goal. Now, I've already spoken a bit about empathy, but empathy isn't just empathy for other people. Empathy is also empathy for yourself. Oftentimes we're much nicer to others, and our itty bitty shitty committee is so cruel to ourselves. The things that we will say to ourselves, we would never even consider saying to somebody else. So this whole idea of self-compassion and empathy, and not just feeling for somebody, but sometimes empathy gets us moving for people, right? And if we think about what's going on in the globe right now, you know, we need empathy that makes us move, that makes us shift things, that makes us make a difference because we're feeling the suffering of other people and also the feeling that it's creating in ourselves, right? So empathy is one of these skills that we can learn. Um, we can learn to think more about, I think they call it, there's a particular word and it'll come to me, but putting yourself into somebody else's shoes. Like if I was born that, how would I feel? Like the ability to be able to even just ask that question. If I was born, you know, from a different race, if I was born in a different country, if I was born with a different gender dysphoria, if I was born with a different sexuality issue, so anything, if I was born with that, how would I then want people to treat me? And I think if
Mhm.
we can do that and put ourselves into other people's shoes, or at least like hallucinate what it might be like, we would show up completely differently. We would have so much more compassion for everybody because, you know, if I was born there, I may think the same way. And the only reason I think the way I do is because where I was lucky enough to be, right? And I think we've got to navigate this. We've really got to think about this one. So empathy is not just something that we feel, it's something that we do. And it's not just for others, it's also for ourselves, right? So building that skill of self-compassion, I think, is one of the biggest ones because most people aren't kind to themselves. And then the other one is pursue your noble goal. And what does that mean? Jason talked about values, and values, if we can run things through the lens of our values, we're going to be much happier, much make better decisions, feel more balanced. Sometimes our values can be in conflict, you know, they really can be. But on the whole, you know, if we can align to our values, we're going to show up more authentic and better. And to take that one step further, then coming up with what is your true north? What is your why? Why are you here? And I think we've spoken about this in one of our previous podcasts, but getting
Mhm.
really clear on, you know, why am I on the planet? What am I here to do, to serve, to become, to impact? And getting, and you don't have to share that with anybody else. This is just for you. It's just something that you can work on for your own self to work out like what is it that you really, what lights you up? What makes you feel alive in what you do? So I know I shared mine once before, but I'll share it again. My noble goal is to shine a light on potential and witness magic. And I do that in everything that I do, whether it's with my kids, whether it's the work that I choose to do, whether it's, you know, the house that I buy, like, or every decision I make, I run through that. Is this going to allow me to witness potential and magic? You know, if not, I'm not doing it because I know it's not in alignment with who I am and why I'm here. So they're the last two competencies. And if you can get that true north, that north star for yourself, this noble goal around why am I here? Then your life is going to be purpose filled and you're going to feel much more, you know, contribution is what gives us fulfillment, right?
Mhm.
To work on something bigger than yourself, to leave a legacy of some sort. And even if that's just with your kids and your family, like it doesn't have to be a global legacy. But if you're really clear on, you know, I want to be the best mum that I can be and have my kids the most, you know, well adjusted, well rounded, that is a amazing noble goal. Or it might be, you know, I want to change humanity or, you know, whatever it is. Like it could be any extreme from one side to the other, but get clear on yours. Because
Mhm.
once you've got that, that then kind of impacts all the other competencies, right? It gives you the juice that allows you to live life like you're on fire.
Yeah, it almost, and I'm sure there's probably been some study done on this, right? That if you're operating at that true north, right, with your true purpose and your true fulfillment, that it probably, and that's why I say probably, because I don't know if there's actually been any studies done, but it probably changes you at a cellular level. You know,
Oh,
um, like
absolutely would.
trauma,
Yeah.
like trauma. can actually change you at a cellular level. And so I'm sure the opposite can do the same thing. Um, and I think, I'll just reiterate it again, getting super crystal clear on your values and who you are is just, it's so important because, I listen to a lot of young people, right? And even think like when I was young myself, I want to be that CEO of a big, organization or a VP or an SVP. And, that's some people's true north. But I think as life goes on and you gain wisdom and perception and all that, and you really get clear on what you were talking about, Leeanne, a lot of times it's in such a different direction than what you kind of perceived in your younger self or your younger years, right?
And it
Not all
evolves.
the, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate that values part because it's just so because if you don't know your values, you're just kind of out there existing and out there just kind of discombobulated and reactionary and this, that, and the next thing. So
Yeah.
um
And actually, the other part of that, if you know your values and your true north, you can actually be authentic, right? You've got this level of authenticity and you inspire others because of that.
mhm,
Um, and that's what builds trust, right? And at the end of the day, we want to build trust with those around us, whether it's our families, friends, communities, work, colleagues. It's all about building trust. So being able to build these competencies, to be able to be truly aligned to what's important to you, to have the
mhm,
courage to show up and embrace the suck and the yuck as well as the good stuff, right? Like
yeah,
really having the empathy for self and others. Um, Creates cultures that outperform others because of that ability to feel seen, to feel safe, to feel valued. And if we can create that for ourselves and for other people, we're going to have, um, everyone raises collectively because
yeah,
they all feel seen, they all feel valued, they all feel safe. And it's these skills that allow us to do that. So again, the competencies are learnable, teachable. We will post the link to the website for 6 seconds because it's useful. There's lots of resources there. Um, yeah, and I think it's a useful thing because I know when I learnt this one, I was just like, wow. I always thought being highly optimistic was great, and I could see how it's caused me relationships because I didn't embrace the suck with people,
yeah.
and so we can all learn, about ourselves and we can use that demo switch to ramp them up or turn them down as needed.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's in before we go into the top three tips is in this fast, complex world that we live in, right? And just so fast paced. Like I think that turn down the dial and adding that thinking of it as a light switch, right? Going into a room or whatever. I think it's just something that's so easy and digestible that people can remember, like just even in the moment, just as a visual. It's like, okay, like is this emotion like on full bright or is it on full dim, right? Um, is there anything else you want to put in there, Leanne, before we go to the top takeaways?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Here. Okay. So with the EQ advantage, emotions as intelligence, what are our top three tips? Um, and we hope that you are enjoying our more visual um, um, slides. So we decided to ramp it up a little bit to create visuals to our tips and resources. So the first one is um, emotions are information on both sides of the spectrum. Good, the bad, a lot in the middle. They're not obstacles, right? So they are pieces of data and information, and looking through that lens can actually also help a lot with self-regulation as well, right? To not think that every emotion is like, oh my God, this incredible obstacle that I gotta climb over or get through or whatever, which then leads into the tip of awareness creates choice, right? And, like I was talking and you were also talking on that consequential thinking, right? Like, it doesn't always have to be over in this bad area. It can also be in the good area. And that even if you have to make a choice like in a split second, when you have those tools, it's amazing how fast they can work. So know that your awareness is also what gives you that EQ edge, right? And it also helps with those data points of information coming in and helping to kind of laser see through those obstacles or non-obstacles much more clearly. And thirdly, regulation unlocks performance. So when you are emotionally regulated and in alignment, it can skyrocket your performance because you have that awareness, you have the lens that you can look through the data at and not see everything as this insurmountable obstacle, but sometimes the yellow brick road to the land of Oz. And so know that these three are so married together, and they always don't need an hour to think through it. Like, you can use these once you sharpen your skills. You can use those in those split second or those moments where you're faced with tough decisions or an answer that you got to give that might have great impact on both sides of the spectrum, depending on how you respond. Anything else you want to add in?
On this one, yeah, especially this regulation unlocks performance, because the question is, how do we regulate? And one of the things that I just mentioned it before, but I want to say it again, and again, it's a 6 seconds model. It's TFA. Can I modify the way I think about this, which will change my state? Can I modify the way I act? Like, can I choose to do something differently, which will change the way I think and, feel? Or can I think, can I change the way I feel about this? So can I change the way I think? Can I change the way I act? Can I change the way I feel? And it doesn't have to be in that order, but modifying just one of those will impact the other two. So if I change the way I feel, the way I think is different, the way I act is different. If I change the way I act, that will impact the way I think and feel. If I change the way I think or feel, that's going to impact the others, right? So just modifying one of those, think, feel, act. If I can modify one, that will impact the other two. And I think using something really simple like that can be really helpful. It's not that, we're not asking for miracles, but just little micro moments of choice, and the outcomes will be completely different. So I just wanted to say that.
Awesome.
So we might move on to the resources. So we've got a couple of things here for you in resources. We will post the links into the YouTube so you can get there really quickly. But the first one is The Power of Emotional Intelligence by 6 Seconds by Josh Freedman, who's one of the founders of 6 Seconds. He's a fantastic speaker. And it's a really good book, and it kind of double or triple clicks on what we've gone over today, the model and all the competencies. So if you want a deeper dive, definitely have a look at that book. There's also a YouTube channel of 6 Seconds with lots of great things that you can watch around emotional intelligence and bringing this stuff to life. Like, it's okay to know it conceptually, but how do I actually do it? So the YouTube channel will really give you lots of great things about that. And then there's a couple of TED Talks, one by Daniel Goleman and the other one by Susan David. And they're fantastic. Susan David has got a book called Emotional Agility. I've read it. It's a great book. I could have put that down in books as well, so I should have thought about that. And alternatively, Daniel Goleman has done a huge amount of work. He's the name it to tame it guy. I think the guy that came up with that. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, so lots of great resources. We will post the links, but do a deeper dive, get to know yourself and lead yourself well, because that's where the richness of life is, really.
Absolutely. And we're excited for next week's episode, episode 16, which will be on habits plus neuroplasticity, changing your brain and changing your life. So there's going to be a lot of great conversation there with Leeanne and I, and tips and et ceteras. So that is next Wednesday, the 18th of February, LA time 2:30 p.m. and Thursday, February 19th, Sydney time at 9:30 a.m. AEDT.
Thank you.
And as always, a glance at the full series. And
yeah,
with that, we can go into our closing.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us today. And the thing, if I can leave you with something, is, keep noticing, keep choosing, and keep being human, and find your authenticity, because that's where joy lies. So thank you, everybody, for being here with us today.
Yes. And, as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple: to have those conversations that matter and remind you don't have to figure out this complex thing called life on your own. We're here to have those conversations beside you, and to give you some helpful tips and tricks to navigate life. And I think what Leeanne said is get to know yourself, because once you know yourself, everything just clicks so much easier. Not 100% of the
Absolutely.
time, but the majority of the time. So
yeah. So we hope we've sparked something new for you today, a new insight, new thinking, or just a new question, as always. And if you like what you saw, please share it, subscribe, hit the like button, and tell your friends. We look forward to seeing you next week.
yes, because when we talk,
we really talk.
And anything is possible.
So let's talk.
With real conversations
and limitless possibilities. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.